The Selay Emperor's plasma blade sliced through the sobbing 12-year-old girl's neck, her head dropping to the floor with a thud as crimson blood sprayed the Galactic Council chamber. "No, Sarah," the girl's father, Roy Ross, screamed. The grizzled war veteran shoved his way past the insectoid guards, dropping to his knees and cradling his daughter's lifeless body. His anguished cries echoed through the hall. Emperor Boron sneered down from his throne. The human child was trespassing on the sacred Selay tomb world. The punishment for such blasphemy is death. Roy looked up, tear-filled eyes burning with pure hatred. She was an innocent little girl exploring ruins out of curiosity. You murdered her in cold blood without even a trial. Your sentimental display only highlights why you humans are a weak, inferior species. Guards, remove this blubbering fool from my sight. Boron waved his clawed hand dismissively. As the Selay soldiers dragged Roy away from Sarah's body, he locked eyes with Boron. "You have no idea what you've unleashed, you son of a bitch. Humanity will rain vengeance down upon the Selay like nothing you can imagine. I will dedicate every remaining moment of my life to hunting you down and watching you die painfully and slowly." Boron only laughed mockingly as Roy was pulled from the room, but some of the other alien counselors shifted uneasily and muttered to each other. "Did you see the look in that human's eyes? He's not going to stop until the Emperor is dead." I've seen humans fight before. Their tenacity is legendary. A single human seeking vengeance is more dangerous than an army. We should have just imprisoned the girl. What if the humans declare total war on the Selay? "Silence!" Boron slammed his fist on his throne. "I will not cower before apes, let them come." As Roy was thrown out of the citadel, Sarah's blood still coating his hands, he walked calmly to his ship and set a course for Earth. The moment the news of his daughter's murder reached humanity, it would mean the end of the Selay, or the end of mankind. This was a fight for survival now. The only question was, who would be the last one standing? And who would be praying for mercy that would never come? Roy's ship landed on Earth, the weight of his grief and rage bearing down on him like a collapsing star. He strode into the Earth Defense Council chamber, his eyes hard as steel. The council members looked up as he entered, some with sympathy, others with trepidation. "I demand justice for my daughter's murder," Roy said, his voice raw. "The Selay Emperor executed her in cold blood without trial or mercy. We cannot let this stand." Admiral Cover, a battle-hardened veteran, leaned forward. "We're all outraged by this atrocity, Roy, but the Selay are technologically superior. A war could mean the end of humanity." Roy slammed his fist on the table, the bang echoing through the room. Everyone fell silent. "They think we're weak, that we'll just cower in fear and accept this injustice. But they don't know the depths of human resolve. We've faced extinction before, and we've always emerged stronger. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you awaken the sleeping giant of humanity." The council members looked at each other, some nodding in agreement, others still hesitant. They deliberated for hours, weighing the risks and rewards of war. In the end, they turned to Roy. "What do you propose?" Admiral Cover asked. Roy brought up a hologram of a moon orbiting a gas giant. "This is Thaxis Prime. It's where the Selay mine the helium-3 that fuels their fusion reactors and powers their empire. If we can cripple those mines, we'll deal a devastating blow to their economy and military." The council members studied the hologram, murmuring to each other. Finally, Admiral Cover stood. "It's a bold plan, risky, but it could work. Roy, you'll lead the strike force. Assemble your team and begin training immediately. We'll provide whatever resources you need." Roy nodded, a grim smile on his face. "I already have a few candidates in mind. Soldiers with the skills and the motivation to make the Selay pay." As the meeting adjourned, Roy walked out, his mind already racing with plans. He handpicked his team carefully: demolitions experts, hackers, sharpshooters, and close-quarters combat specialists. Each had lost someone to the Selay, or had a personal vendetta against the insectoid empire. They trained in secret, studying Selay weapons, tactics, and weaknesses. They ran simulations of the mines, planning their infiltration and sabotage down to the last detail. Roy knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had the element of surprise, and more importantly, they had the burning desire for vengeance driving them. The Selay had no idea what was coming. The Helium-3 mines on Thaxis Prime were about to become a crucible, where the future of humanity would be forged in blood and fire. Roy just hoped that, when the encrypted message from the mysterious Zaxor first reached the Terran strike team's comms array, Roy eyed the blinking light on the console suspiciously. His finger hovered over the delete button, ready to purge what was surely some Selay trick. But something stayed his hand. He tapped the message. A holographic image of an insectoid face shimmered into view. The Selay's compound eyes gleamed with intelligence, but there was a weariness etched into its carapace that spoke of deep, unrelenting sorrow. This was no arrogant Selay warrior. Commander Roy Ross, I am Zaxor, once a chief scientist of the Selay Empire. I offer you my aid in your mission against Thaxis Prime. I know you have no reason to trust me, but— You're damn right I don't trust you, Roy growled. Your kind murdered my daughter. Zaxor closed his eyes. I too have lost a daughter to the cruelty of my own people. She refused to take part in the extermination of the Vrul, a peaceful race who had done us no wrong. For her defiance, the Emperor had her put to death. The Selay's voice cracked with grief. I see in your mission a chance to honor my daughter's memory, a chance to strike back against the tyranny that has corrupted my species. I will give you everything, the mine's layout, guard rotations, security codes. Just let me help you destroy them. Roy studied the alien's face, searching for any hint of deception. He found only pain and fierce determination, emotions he knew all too well. Slowly, he nodded. Send us the intel. But if this is a trap, I'll personally rip your head from your thorax. With Zaxor's schematics, the strike team drilled on a perfect holographic replica of the mines. They memorized every tunnel, every choke point, every hiding spot. Stolen Selay cloaking devices were grafted onto their armor, rendering them invisible to the guards' infrared vision. Roy split the team into squads, each tasked with planting a quantum fission charge in a critical junction of the mine complex. Properly placed, the explosives would vaporize the reactive Helium-3 in a cataclysmic chain reaction. As the day of the mission approached, Roy sequestered himself in his quarters, poring over every detail of the plan. He hardly noticed when the door hissed open. Dad, I want in. Roy looked up sharply. Jack stood in the doorway, jaw set with iron determination that was all too familiar. Roy shook his head. No, it's too dangerous. I already lost your sister. I won't lose you too. Sarah was my sister. Jax's shout rang off the bulkheads. You think you're the only one who gets to avenge her? This isn't about revenge. It's about stopping the Selay before they can hurt anyone else. Bullshit. Revenge is all you care about. But this time you need me. Jax threw a datapad on the desk. Schematics of the mine's security systems scrolled across the screen. I can hack their alarms, their blast doors, their auto turrets. You need me in there. Roy gritted his teeth, a vein pulsing in his forehead. But as much as he hated to admit it, Jax was right. Finally, he relented. You follow my orders to the letter, understand? No heroics, no risks. Jax nodded, a fierce light in his eyes. I'll make you proud, Dad, for Sarah. The strike ship sliced through the void, a matte black dagger invisible to Selay sensors. The mood was grim and quiet, each soldier alone with their thoughts and the faces of their lost loved ones. Suddenly the comms crackled to life. The withered visage of Emperor Boron leered at them from the view screen. Foolish humans, he sneered, mandibles clicking with disdain. You think you can challenge the might of the Selay Empire? You'll soon learn the price of your arrogance. Roy said nothing, just stared back with eyes cold as the depths of space. The screen went dark. He turned to face his team assembled in the drop bay, Jack's fingers dancing over the keys of his cyber warfare rig, Zara, the demo expert, hefting a bandolier of quantum charges, Grok, the Kragan mercenary, prepping his plasma cannon. A dozen others, each hand-picked for their skills and thirst for payback. Roy took a deep breath. No inspirational speeches, no stirring rhetoric. They all knew what they had to do, what they were willing to sacrifice. The light turned green. The drop doors yawned open. Thaxis Prime loomed below, the Helium-3 mines glinting on its barren surface like a poisoned dagger aimed at the heart of the galaxy. Roy checked his rifle one last time and stepped to the edge of the drop ramp. It was time to show the Sele what humans were truly capable of. It was time to go to war. The obsidian depths of space around Thaxis Prime erupted into a maelstrom of plasma fire and searing lasers. Jax's diversionary strike force wove their nimble craft through the Sele warship's deadly onslaught, strafing the larger vessel's weapon batteries and engine ports. Iridescent explosions bloomed across the void as the human fighters' precision strikes found their marks. The Sele fleet retaliated with a storm of crackling plasma torpedoes that homed in on the human ships. Several fighters vanished in blinding flashes of light, their valiant pilots vaporized instantly. Jax gritted his teeth as he saw his comrades fall, but he never relented in his assault. His fingers danced across the control panel, sending his ship into a dizzying spiral to evade the incoming fire. At the last second, he cut his thrusters and fired, his plasma cannons raking across a Sele destroyer's hull and setting off a chain reaction in its ammunition stores. Meanwhile, deep within the bowels of the Helium-3 mines, Roy and his infiltration team crept through the labyrinthine tunnels, following Zaxor's schematics to the critical junctures. They moved with practiced efficiency, covering each other as they leapfrogged from one position to the next. At each designated point, Zara planted a quantum charge, arming the detonator with a series of rapid keystrokes. The devices hummed with barely contained destructive power, their status lights blinking an ominous red. Just as they were approaching the final target, an ear-splitting alarm reverberated through the tunnels. Roy swore under his breath. They had been detected. "All units, fall back to the extraction point," he barked into his commune. "We've been compromised." The humans began a fighting retreat, leapfrogging back through the tunnels as they traded fire with the Sele security forces swarming towards them. The air crackled with the exchange of plasma bolts and the acrid scent of scorched metal. Roy took point, his rifle snapping from target to target with lethal precision. Sele warriors crumpled, their exoskeletons shattered by the high-velocity rounds. But for every insectoid Roy cut down, 3 more seemed to take its place. The Sele pressed their assault with the fanatical zeal of a species that had never known defeat. Just as the humans were about to be overrun, Jax's panicked voice burst from Roy's earpiece. "Dad, we've got a problem. The Sele have called in reinforcements and we're taking heavy losses. We can't hold them off much longer." Roy's heart clenched at the desperation in his son's voice, but he forced himself to focus on the mission. They were too close to turn back now. "Jax, you need to pull out. Regroup with the rest of the team at the fallback point." "But Dad, what about—" "That's an order," Roy snapped. "I'll handle things here." He turned to his soldiers, their faces grim beneath their helmets. "We've come too far to fail now. We'll hold the line and make sure those charges go off, no matter what." The humans nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifice they might be called upon to make. They took up defensive positions, pouring fire into the advancing Sele horde. Roy stood at the center of the line, a bulwark against the insectoid tide. His rifle bucked in his hands as he sent a fusillade of plasma into the enemy ranks. The ground grew slick with the ichor oozing from shattered Sele carapaces, but still they came, heedless of their losses, driven by a single-minded hunger for human blood. Roy knew they couldn't hold out forever, but they would hold long enough for Jax and the others to escape, long enough for the charges to detonate and cripple the Sele's ability to wage war. Long enough to avenge Sarah and all the other victims of the Sele's cruelty. Roy ejected his spent power cell and slammed home a fresh one. Around him, his soldiers fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves, refusing to yield an inch. The fate of humanity would be decided here, in the blood-soaked tunnels of Thaxis Prime, and the Selae would learn the true cost of their arrogance. As the battle raged in the tunnels, Zaxa's long fingers flew over a holographic control panel. His multifaceted eyes reflected lines of scrolling code as he hacked into the Selae communication network. With a final, decisive keystroke, he broadcast his message across every view screen and audio channel in the Selae fleet. The Selae soldiers faltered as Zaxa's face appeared before them, his voice resonating through their helmets. He spoke of the countless atrocities committed in the name of Selae superiority, of entire species wiped out, of worlds left barren and lifeless. He laid bare the cruelty of Emperor Boron and the lies that had been fed to the Selae people. In the mines below, Roy and his team pressed their advantage as confusion rippled through the Selae ranks. Some soldiers lowered their weapons, doubt etched on their insectoid faces. Others turned their plasma rifles on their own commanders, their loyalty to the Emperor shattered by Zaxa's revelations. Amid the chaos, a young Selae officer named Taruk rallied a group of defectors. With a series of quick hand signals, he led them to join forces with the humans. Roy eyed the Selae warily, but Taruk met his gaze with a solemn nod. Together, the unlikely allies fought their way deeper into the mines, toward the central control room. Roy and Taruk took point, their respective teams covering each other with interlocking fields of fire. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the tunnels, the air thick with the stench of ozone and burnt chitin. As they neared their objective, a massive hologram of Emperor Boron flickered to life before them. The Selae ruler's face was contorted with rage, his mandibles quivering. "Foolish humans," he spat. "Did you think your pathetic rebellion could succeed? I hold the lives of your comrades in my claws." The image shifted to reveal Jax and the other captured humans, bound and beaten, plasma rifles aimed at their heads. Roy's heart seized in his chest. "Surrender now," Boron hissed, "or watch them die." Roy hesitated, torn between his mission and his son. But Jax, his face bloodied but his spirit unbroken, shouted defiantly, "Don't you dare give up, Dad. Finish this no matter what happens to me." Roy's jaw tightened, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his face. He turned to Taruk, his voice steady. "Do it!" The Selae officer nodded grimly and input the detonation code. For a heartbeat there was silence, then the world erupted in fire. Explosions chained through the mines, each charge igniting the volatile helium-3. The ground heaved and bucked, throwing Roy and the others from their feet. On the surface, geysers of flame burst from the moon's crust, engulfing the Selae ships in a hellish inferno. In the chaos, Roy struggled to his feet, his ears ringing. He rallied his team and their Selae allies, leading them in a desperate charge toward the surface. They emerged onto a hellscape of twisted metal and burning wreckage, the once mighty Selae fleet reduced to smoldering husks. But there was no time to celebrate. Roy's eyes locked onto a heavily fortified bunker, swarming with Boron's elite guard. Jax was in there somewhere. With a battle cry that echoed across the ravaged landscape, Roy led the charge. Plasma fire ripped through the air as the two sides clashed, neither giving quarter. Soldiers fell on both sides, their blood mingling on the scorched ground. Roy fought like a man possessed, his plasma blade carving a path through the Emperor's guard. He had to reach Jax, had to save his son. At last he stood before Boron himself, the Emperor's once resplendent armor dented and scorched. The Selae ruler snarled, drawing his own plasma blade. "You've taken everything from me," Roy roared, lunging forward. Their blades clashed in a blinding flare of energy, the air sizzling with each strike. They traded blows in a furious dance, neither able to gain the upper hand. But Roy's rage and grief fueled him, driving him to fight harder, faster. With a final desperate thrust, he plunged his blade into Boron's chest. The Emperor staggered back, his compound eyes wide with shock. He crumpled to the ground, ichor pooling beneath his ruined body. Roy stood over his foe, chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. He had avenged Sara, but at what cost? He turned to search for Jax among the chaos of the battle, praying that his son had survived. Roy stood amid the smoldering ruins of the Helium-3 mines, his plasma rifle still smoking. Jax lay on the ground nearby, battered but alive. Taruk and the other Seeley defectors were tending to the wounded. Roy reached down and pulled his son to his feet. Jax winced but managed a grim smile. "We did it, Dad. We won." Roy shook his head. "It's not over yet. The real fight is just beginning." As if on cue, Roy's comlink crackled to life. It was Admiral Kova, her voice tight with urgency. "Roy, we're getting reports of uprisings on dozens of Seeley colonies. Zaxor's message has spread like wildfire. The Seeley Empire is in chaos." Roy's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then it's time to strike while the iron is hot. We need to support these rebellions, arm the defectors, and keep the pressure on what's left of Boron's regime." Over the next weeks, Roy, Jax, and Tarek led a series of lightning raids on Seeley military bases and supply depots. They struck hard and fast, seizing weapons and equipment before vanishing into the void. On the planet Xerxes Prime, Roy and his team infiltrated a heavily guarded armory. Jax hacked the security systems, opening the blast doors and disabling the auto turrets. Roy and Tarek stormed inside, plasma bolts flying as they cut down the Seeley guards. They loaded crates of plasma rifles and quantum grenades onto their waiting ship. As they lifted off, Seeley fighters screamed toward them, cannons blazing. Jax swung the ship's turret around and returned fire, the void lighting up with the crisscrossing beams of deadly energy. Elsewhere, Tarek led a sabotage mission on a key Seeley communication hub. They planted explosives on the towering transmission arrays and power generators. As they detonated the charges, the entire facility erupted in a blinding fireball visible from orbit. With each successful mission, more and more Seeley flocked to the rebellion's banner. But the Loyalists, though weakened, refused to surrender. They retreated to their fortified homeworld of Kothax, determined to make their final stand. The rebel fleet, a ragtag armada of human warships and retrofitted Seeley vessels, dropped out of warp at the edge of the Kothax system. The planet glowed like a baleful ember, its surface bristling with plasma cannons and missile batteries. As the battle raged in orbit, Roy and his team made planetfall in a battered dropship. They fought their way through the war-torn streets of the capital city, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burnt flesh. Seeley loyalists defended every block with fanatical zeal, but the rebels pressed on, bolstered by human air support and armor. Roy led the charge, his plasma blade carving a path through the enemy lines. In the midst of the chaos, Roy's comlink pinged with an incoming message from Zaxor. The Seeley scientist's face was haggard, his compound eyes filled with dread. "Roy, I've uncovered something terrible. Emperor Boron was not acting alone. He was merely a pawn of a much larger conspiracy, a shadowy organization known as the Galactic Syndicate." Roy felt a chill run down his spine as Zaxor continued. "The Syndicate has been manipulating galactic events for centuries, pulling the strings of governments and corporations alike. They see the Seeley rebellion and humanity's rise as threats to their power. They will stop at nothing to maintain their grip on the galaxy." Roy's jaw tightened as the implications sank in. Even if they won here on Kothax, the real enemy was still out there, lurking in the shadows. He turned to Jax and Tarek, his eyes hard with determination. "We've come this far. We're not stopping now. Once we've crushed these loyalists, we're going after the Syndicate. We'll expose their crimes and bring them to justice, no matter what it takes." As the battle raged around them, Roy knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger war, a war for the soul of the galaxy itself, and he would fight it to his last breath. Roy's heart pounded as he read the distress call from the Zortian colony. The Syndicate mercenaries were ruthless, slaughtering civilians and burning cities. He couldn't abandon the Zortians to their fate. Roy turned to Jax and Tarek. "I need you two to lead the final assault on the Seeley homeworld. Take the rebel forces and crush what's left of Boron's loyalists." Jax nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll finish this, Dad. The Seeley Empire dies today." Roy clasped his son's shoulder. "I know you will, but I have to go to the Zortians. They're critical allies, and we can't let the Syndicate have them. He assembled a strike team of his most elite soldiers, both human and Sele. They boarded a stealth ship and raced toward the besieged Zortian system. As they dropped out of warp, the scale of the devastation became clear. Zortian ships lay shattered and burning, drifting lifelessly. The colony's defense platforms were reduced to molten slag. And in the midst of it all, the Syndicate fleet hung like a swarm of locusts raining death upon the planet below. Roy gritted his teeth. "Take us in, fast and low. We need to get boots on the ground." The strike team landed amidst the rubble of a shattered Zortian city. Plasma fire ripped through the air as the Syndicate mercenaries clashed with the desperate Zortian defenders. Roy led the charge, his rifle blazing. His team followed close behind, taking up defensive positions around huddled groups of Zortian civilians. But for every mercenary they cut down, 3 more seemed to take their place. The Syndicate troops were heavily armed and well-equipped, their armor shrugging off blaster fire. Roy watched in despair as his soldiers fell one by one, their blood staining the rubble. They were being overrun, and the civilians were paying the price. In a last desperate gambit, Roy fought his way to the Zortian command center. He burst inside, finding a scene of controlled chaos. Zortian engineers worked frantically at consoles, trying to coordinate their failing defenses. At the center of it all stood an aged Zortian, his exoskeleton gleaming with implanted tech. He turned as Roy approached, compound eyes whirring and clicking. "I am Zorax, prime engineer of this colony." His voice was a buzz of static. "You must be Commander Ross, your reputation precedes you." Roy holstered his rifle. "Zorax, we're here to help, but my team is being slaughtered out there. The Syndicate mercs have us outgunned. We need your help." Zorax clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "I did not wish to involve my people in your war, Commander. We are builders, not soldiers." Roy slammed his fist on the console, desperation etched on his face. "Damn it, Zorax, this is your war too. The Syndicate won't stop with us. They'll enslave your people, just like they've done to countless others. Please, help us fight them. Help me save both our peoples." There was a long moment of silence. Then slowly Zorax nodded. "Very well, Commander. I cannot sit idly by while others fight for our freedom." He turned to his engineers. "Bring out the EMP cannon and the plasma lances. It's time we showed these mercenaries what Zortian science can do." Minutes later, Roy stood atop the command center, a bulky Zortian EMP cannon resting on his shoulder. His remaining soldiers took up positions around him, wielding strange, angular Zortian weapons. Zorax's voice crackled over the comm. "The EMP blast will disable their ships and weapons, but only for a short time. You must strike hard and fast." Roy braced himself. "Fire!" A pulse of crackling blue energy erupted from the cannon, washing over the Syndicate forces. Their ships dropped from the sky, crashing into the rubble. The mercenaries' advanced rifles sputtered and died in their hands. Roy roared a battle cry and charged, his team close behind. The plasma lances in their hands fired searing bolts of energy, punching through the mercenaries' armor like it was paper. The battle was fierce and bloody, but with the playing field leveled, Roy's soldiers cut through the Syndicate ranks. The mercenaries, used to relying on their technological advantage, were thrown into disarray by the sudden loss of their gear. The fight raged for hours, the streets of the Zortian city running red with blood and echoing with the cries of the wounded and dying. But in the end, the Syndicate forces broke and ran, fleeing back to their ships in disarray. As the last mercenary vessel limped away, trailing smoke and sparks, a ragged cheer went up from Roy's soldiers and the Zortian defenders. They had won. The colony was safe. Zorax approached Roy, his exoskeleton scorched and dented, but his eyes shining with fierce pride. He clasped Roy's hand in his own, the cold metal of his digits pressing into Roy's flesh. "You have saved my people, Commander Ross. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Roy shook his head. "You owe us nothing, Zorax. We're in this fight together now. The Syndicate is the real enemy, and we're going to need all the help we can get to bring them down." Zorax nodded, his mandibles clicking. The Zortian Collective stands with you, Commander. Our weapons, our ships, our brightest minds, all are at your disposal. Together, we will rid the galaxy of the Syndicate's corruption. As Roy stood there, surrounded by the rubble and the bodies of the fallen, he felt a flicker of hope amid the grief and exhaustion. With the Zortians at their side, maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance against the Syndicate's might. But even as that hope kindled, a cold dread settled in his gut. He knew this was only the beginning. The Syndicate would not take this defeat lightly. They would strike back, harder and more ruthless than ever. The war for the galaxy's soul had only just begun. The rebel fleet hung in the void of space, basking in the hard-won peace their victory over the Sele had brought. But for Roy, the fight was far from finished. The Galactic Syndicate still lurked in the shadows, their tendrils strangling countless worlds. Roy gathered his most trusted soldiers in the war room of his flagship. Jax leaned against the wall, his cybernetic implants glinting in the dim light. Taruk stood ramrod straight, his Sele carapace scarred from countless battles. A contingent of Zortian warriors, their exoskeletons bristling with advanced weaponry, clustered around the holographic display table. Zaxor's face flickered into view, his compound eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. "I've found it," he said, his voice thrumming with urgency. "The heart of the Syndicate's power, a hidden base deep within the Argos asteroid field." The hologram shifted, revealing a massive structure nestled among the tumbling rocks. Armored towers bristled with cannon emplacements, while swarms of fighter craft patrolled the perimeter. "So that's where they're hiding," Zaxor continued. "Their leaders, their best troops, their most devastating weapons. If we can take that base, we can end the Syndicate's reign of terror once and for all." Roy studied the hologram, his jaw set with grim determination. "Then that's what we'll do. Jax, you're our infiltration specialist. Taruk, you'll lead the assault team, and our Zortian friends will provide the technological edge we need to even the odds." The Zortian commander stepped forward, his voice a buzz of static. "Our cloaking devices will get you past their perimeter defenses, and our EMP charges will disable their automated systems once you're inside." Roy nodded. "Then let's get to work. We strike in 24 hours. The war room erupted into a flurry of activity as the soldiers prepared for the mission. Engineers calibrated weapons and fine-tuned equipment. Medics stocked their kits with advanced Zortian healing tech. Pilots ran endless simulations, memorizing every twist and turn of the asteroid field. As the rebel fleet approached the Argos field, Roy stood on the bridge of his ship, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The asteroids loomed before them, jagged and foreboding. Somewhere among those rocks lurked the key to the galaxy's future. "All teams report in," Roy barked into the comm. One by one, the infiltration teams signaled their readiness. Jax and his hackers, their fingers poised over their consoles. Taruk and his Sele warriors, their plasma rifles charged and humming. The Zortians, their cloaking fields shimmering around them like heat mirages. "Commence operation," Roy ordered. The rebel ships slipped into the asteroid field, weaving through the tumbling rocks with practiced ease. As they approached the Syndicate base, the Zortian cloaking fields engaged, rendering the ships invisible to sensors and the naked eye. They docked with the base's outer hull, cutting through the armored plating with precision lasers. Roy was the first through the breach, his rifles sweeping the corridor for threats. The base's interior was a maze of twisting passages and cavernous chambers. The infiltration teams moved swiftly and silently, guided by Zaxor's schematics. Whenever they encountered Syndicate patrols or automated defenses, they dispatched them with ruthless efficiency. Jax's team hacking systems, Taruk's warriors engaging in lightning-fast close-quarters combat, the Zortians' advanced weaponry making short work of any resistance. As they pushed deeper into the base, Roy's team planted EMP charges at key junctions and power nodes. The explosives pulsed with barely contained energy, ready to unleash a crippling electromagnetic blast on Roy's signal. At last they reached the heart of the base, the central command center. Roy paused at the massive blast doors, his hand hovering over the detonator for the EMP charges. "Breach it," he ordered. Tarek and his warriors took up position, their plasma rifles leveled at the door. Jax input a rapid series of commands on his console, his face bathed in the glow of his implants. With a hiss of hydraulics, the blast doors slid open. Roy and his team charged inside, weapons blazing. The command center was a storm of chaos and confusion. Alarms blared and warning lights flashed as the syndicate leaders scrambled to rally their defenses. But Roy's team was already among them, striking with the speed and ferocity of a thunderbolt. Roy found himself face to face with a grizzled Kryn warlord, the alien's forearms each wielding a crackling energy blade. Roy ducked and wove, his own plasma sword flashing in a blinding arc. The warlord pressed the attack, his blades humming through the air with dizzying speed. But Roy was faster. He parried a slash, then lunged inside the Kryn's guard. His plasma blade pierced the warlord's chest, the smell of seared flesh filling the air. Around him, the rest of the syndicate leaders fell one by one. Jax dueled a cyborg Zelnian, the hacker's implants flashing as he overrode the cyborg's systems. Tarek grappled with a massive Gorthian, the two warriors locked in a brutal hand-to-hand brawl. And then it was over. The last syndicate leader fell, and a sudden silence descended on the command center. Roy stood amid the carnage, his chest heaving. They had done it. The head of the syndicate had been cut off. But even as the thought crossed his mind, a new alarm began to sound. A deep, resonant klaxon that seemed to shake the very foundations of the base. "Warning," a disembodied voice intoned. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. Base will detonate in T-5 minutes." Roy spun to face Jax. "Shut it down!" The hacker was already in motion, his fingers flying over the command console. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness as Jax fought to override the self-destruct. With a final, triumphant keystroke, the klaxon fell silent. Jax slumped back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. "Got it." Roy allowed himself a moment of relief. Then he turned to the rest of his team. "Secure the prisoners and start downloading their data cores. We need to know everything they know. Every base, every agent, every dirty secret." As his soldiers set to work, Roy stood before the main view screen, watching the syndicate's secrets spill across the screen. Bases hidden in the hearts of dying stars, weapons capable of shattering planets, lists of corrupt officials and bought politicians. With this information, they could root out the syndicate's influence across the galaxy. They could finally bring peace and justice to the countless worlds that had suffered under the syndicate's boot. But even as Roy savored the taste of victory, a new alarm began to blare. He spun to face the view screen, his blood running cold at the sight that greeted him. A massive fleet of syndicate ships, each one bristling with weapons, had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the asteroid field. They were surrounded, cut off from any hope of escape or reinforcement. The enemy knew their location, and they were coming. Roy turned to his soldiers, his eyes hard as flint. "Prepare for battle. This isn't over yet." The rebel soldiers scrambled to their positions, readying their weapons and steeling themselves for the fight to come. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to surrender now. As the first syndicate ships opened fire, their cannons lighting up the void with searing bolts of plasma, Roy raised his rifle and sighted down the barrel. No matter what happened, no matter how many enemies they faced, he and his soldiers would stand their ground. They would fight to their last breath. For the dream of a galaxy free from tyranny and oppression. For the memory of Sarah and all the other innocents who had been crushed under the syndicate's heel. For the future they had bled to build. They would hold the line, no matter the cost. The syndicate ships swarmed around the asteroid base, plasma cannons charging with deadly intent. Roy gripped his rifle, his knuckles white beneath his armored gloves. Jax and Tarek took up positions beside him, their faces grim. The comms crackled with panicked chatter as the rebel ships tried desperately to break through the syndicate blockade. But the enemy ships were too many, their firepower too overwhelming. Roy looked around at his battered team, seeing the same realization in their eyes. They were trapped, outnumbered, and outgunned. This was the end. But just as despair threatened to consume them, a blinding flash lit up the void. A massive wormhole tore open space itself, a swirling vortex of energy that dwarfed the assembled fleets. From the depths of the wormhole, a fleet of ships emerged, unlike any Roy had ever seen. Sleek and angular, they shimmered with an otherworldly iridescence, and they were big, dwarfing even the largest Syndicate dreadnoughts. The comms fell silent as every eye turned to these new arrivals. For a long moment, the alien ships hung motionless in space. Then, with a speed that defied belief, they surged forward, weapons flaring to life. Beams of pure energy lanced out, so bright they seared Roy's retinas even through his ship's viewscreen. The beams sliced through the Syndicate ships like a scalpel through flesh, shields flaring and failing in an instant. The Syndicate ships returned fire, plasma bolts and missiles streaking toward the alien fleet, but the newcomers' shields absorbed the onslaught without so much as a flicker. It was a slaughter. The alien ships tore through the Syndicate fleet, their weapons carving paths of utter destruction. Syndicate ships exploded into clouds of molten debris or were sliced clean in half by the searing energy beams. Within minutes, the once mighty Syndicate armada was reduced to a field of shattered wreckage. The few survivors limped away, fleeing into the depths of space. A stunned silence filled the comms. Then a voice spoke, deep and resonant, seeming to echo inside Roy's very mind. "Commander Roy Ross, I am Zelos, leader of the Vortex Guardians. We have watched your struggle against the Syndicate with great interest. Your bravery and determination have impressed us. We offer you our aid in your fight." Roy struggled to find his voice. Thank you, but who are you? Where did you come from?" "We are an ancient race, tasked with maintaining balance in the galaxy. For centuries we have watched from the shadows, but the Syndicate's tyranny threatens the very fabric of peace. We can no longer stand idle." Zelos' voice took on a note of urgency. "But there is much to be done. You and your team must come with us. We will share our knowledge and technology, and together we will end the Syndicate's reign of terror." A shimmering portal opened before Roy's ship. With a deep breath, he guided the vessel through, the rest of his team close behind. They emerged into a place beyond imagination. A vast artificial world stretched before them, filled with towering structures of gleaming metal and pulsing energy. Ships flitted through the air, defying gravity with effortless grace. Roy and his team stepped out onto a wide platform, their eyes wide with wonder. Zelos stood before them, flanked by other Guardians, their forms tall and ethereal. "Welcome," Zelos said, "to the heart of the Vortex Guardians. Here you will learn, you will train, and when the time comes, you will lead the charge against the Syndicate with the might of the Guardians at your back." In the days that followed, Roy and his team were pushed to their limits and beyond. They trained with weapons that could level cities, learned to pilot ships that danced through space like living things. And as they honed their skills, more ships arrived at the sanctuary, filled with soldiers and warriors from a dozen worlds. A coalition was forming, a galactic alliance united in its determination to end the Syndicate's tyranny. Finally the day came. Roy stood at the helm of a Guardian dreadnought, Jax and Taruk at his sides. Behind them stretched a fleet the likes of which the galaxy had never seen, ships from 100 worlds flying in perfect formation. Zelos's face appeared on the viewscreen. "The Syndicate's final stronghold has been located. It is time to end this, once and for all." Roy nodded, his jaw set. "Let's finish this." The fleet leaped forward, tearing through the fabric of space itself. Ahead, the Syndicate's last bastion loomed, bristling with weapons. But this time there was no despair, no sense of inevitable defeat. This time they had the strength of the Guardians, the might of a united galaxy. The final battle had begun, and the galaxy would tremble with its fury. The Galactic Alliance fleet tore through the void, a sword of retribution aimed at the heart of the Syndicate's power. At the vanguard flew the Vortex Guardian flagship, its iridescent hull shimmering with barely contained energy. On the bridge, Roy stood alongside Jax, Tarek and Zelos, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The Syndicate's central world loomed before them, a planet-sized fortress bristling with plasma cannons and shielded by a web of interlocking defenses. Swarms of enemy fighters poured from launch bays, racing to meet the Alliance fleet head-on. "All ships engage at will," Roy ordered, his voice steady. "Concentrate fire on those defense platforms. We need to punch a hole for our ground forces." The space around the planet erupted into a maelstrom of destruction as the two fleets clashed. The Vortex Guardians' advanced weaponry tore through the Syndicate's shields, vaporizing entire squadrons in blinding flashes of light. But the enemy fought back with desperate ferocity, their weapons carving molten scars across the hulls of Alliance ships. On the flagship's bridge, alarms blared as the ship shuddered under a barrage of plasma fire. Consoles sparked and crew members shouted urgent reports, but Roy remained focused on the battle unfolding before him. "Their defenses are weakening," Zelos reported, his fingers flying over the tactical display. "I'm detecting gaps in their perimeter." Roy nodded. "That's our cue. Jax, Tarek, gather your teams. We're going in." The strike force assembled in the hangar bay, a motley assortment of humans, Silay Zortians, and a dozen other races, united by a common purpose. Roy strode to the front, his battle armor gleaming under the harsh lights. "This is it," he said, his voice carrying over the hum of idling engines. "The Syndicate has terrorized the galaxy for too long. Today, we end their reign of tyranny. Today, we fight for every world they've enslaved, every innocent life they've taken. Today, we make them pay." A roar of approval echoed through the hangar as the soldiers boarded their dropships. Roy caught Jax's eye, a moment of unspoken understanding passing between father and son. Then the bay doors yawned open and the dropships plunged towards the planet's surface. Anti-aircraft fire streaked past the viewports as the strike force hurtled through the atmosphere. Several ships vanished in blooms of flame, but the rest pushed on, weaving and jinking to avoid the deadly onslaught. They hit the ground hard, dropships slamming into the planet's barren surface in clouds of dust and debris. Roy was the first one out, his plasma rifle already spitting bolts of searing energy at the Syndicate troops rushing to meet them. The battle was joined in a clash of flesh and metal, plasma bolts and razor-sharp talons. The Syndicate forces fought with the desperate intensity of cornered beasts, hurling themselves at the Alliance soldiers with no regard for their own lives. Roy led the charge, his rifle blazing as he carved a path through the enemy ranks. Beside him, Jax unleashed devastating cyber attacks, his implants flashing as he overrode enemy systems and turned their own weapons against them. Taruk was a whirlwind of destruction, his Silay carapace deflecting blows as he struck down foes with ruthless efficiency. Inch by bloody inch, the strike force fought their way towards the Central Command Citadel, a looming spire of black metal and pulsing energy. The closer they got, the fiercer the resistance became, until every step was paid for in blood and sweat. As they neared the base of the Citadel, a hail of plasma fire erupted from the shadows. Roy's HUD flared with warnings as a group of figures strode into view, the Syndicate's leaders, each one wielding advanced weapons and augmented with glinting cybernetics. A towering Kryn warlord leveled a plasma cannon at Roy, a cruel smile splitting his four-jawed face. A Zelnian cyborg's arm transformed into a crackling energy blade. A Gorthian brute flexed his massive fists, each one studded with gleaming spikes. Roy gritted his teeth and raised his rifle. "Take them down," he roared, and the battle was joined once more. The Syndicate leaders fought with skill and savagery, their augmented bodies moving with blurring speed. Alliance soldiers fell before their onslaught, cut down by plasma blasts and rent by razor-sharp talons. Roy found himself locked in combat with the Kryn warlord, trading blows in a deadly dance. The alien's plasma cannon spat fire, forcing Roy to duck and weave as he returned fire with his rifle. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jax dueling the Zelnian cyborg, his son's implants flashing as he fought to overcome the machine's defenses. Tarek grappled with the Gorthian brute, the two warriors locked in a brutal struggle of strength and skill. Her searing pain exploded in Roy's shoulder as a plasma bolt found its mark. He staggered back, his rifle falling from nerveless fingers. The Kryn loomed over him, cannon leveled at his head. "Die, human filth," the alien snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. A blur of motion, a flash of silver. The Kryn's head snapped back, a razor-sharp blade protruding from his eye socket. Tarek stood behind the fallen warlord, his arm still extended from the throw. "Thanks," Roy gasped, snatching up his rifle and surging to his feet. But his relief was short-lived. A scream of rage and anguish tore through the battlefield. Roy spun to see Jax falling, a smoking hole in his chest. The Zelnian cyborg stood over him, energy blade raised for the killing blow. "No!" The cry tore from Roy's throat as he lunged forward, but he was too far away, too slow. A silver blur passed him, a gleaming arc of metal. Tarek leapt between Jax and the cyborg, his blades flashing in a whirlwind of steel. The cyborg's blade cleaved through the Sele warrior's chest, a spray of ichor splattering the ground. But even as Tarek fell, his own blades found their mark, severing the cyborg's head in a shower of sparks. Roy reached Jax's side, cradling his son's head in his lap. Jax's eyes fluttered open, pain and fear mingling with relief as he saw his father's face. "Dad," he whispered, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "Finish this for all of us." Roy nodded, tears streaking his battle-stained face. He gently laid Jax down and rose to his feet, a cold fury settling over him like a shroud. He rallied the surviving members of the strike team, their faces grim with determination. Together they stormed the citadel, blasting through the massive doors in a hail of plasma fire. Inside they found themselves in a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with pulsing conduits and glowing control panels. And at its center, looming over them like a nightmare made flesh, stood the Overlord. The monstrous alien warlord towered over Roy, his body a grotesque fusion of organic and cybernetic parts. His eyes blazed with malevolent intelligence, his maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. "Welcome, Commander Roy Ross," the Overlord rumbled, his voice a grating electronic growl. "I've been expecting you." Roy raised his rifle, his eyes hard as flint. "It's over, Overlord. The Syndicate falls today." The warlord laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You think you can defeat me? I have crushed 1,000 worlds beneath my heel. I am the Syndicate." With a roar, the Overlord charged, his massive fists swinging with devastating force. Roy rolled aside, barely avoiding a blow that cratered the floor where he had been standing. He came up firing, plasma bolts peppering the Overlord's armored hide. But the warlord barely seemed to feel them, his cybernetic enhancements absorbing the blows with ease. Roy fought hard, he fought smart, but the Overlord seemed unstoppable, an inexorable force of destruction. Every bone-jarring impact drove Roy back, every plasma blast seared his flesh. But Roy kept fighting, even as his strength waned and his armor cracked, for Sarah, for Tarek, for Jax, for every innocent the Syndicate had slaughtered. He would not stop until the Overlord lay dead at his feet. With a final desperate lunge, Roy threw himself at the warlord, plasma blade flashing. The two titans collided in a blaze of sparks and searing heat, their weapons locked in a deadly embrace. And then, with a sickening crack, Roy's blade found a gap in the Overlord's armor, piercing the monster's black heart. The warlord staggered back, a look of disbelief on his grotesque face. But even as he fell, the Overlord lashed out with one final devastating blow. A blade of pure energy erupted from his fist, spearing Roy through the chest. Roy fell to his knees, blood pouring from the gaping wound. He could feel his life ebbing away, his vision darkening at the edges. With the last of his strength, he crawled to the Citadel's control panel and inputted the self-destruct sequence. As alarms blared and warning lights flashed, Roy slumped against the console, a faint smile on his blood-stained lips. He had done it. The Syndicate was finished. Jax and the surviving members of the strike team burst into the chamber, their faces etched with grief and horror as they saw Roy's broken body. They raced to his side, but Roy shook his head weakly. "Go," he whispered, his voice a fading rasp. "Get out of here, the whole planet's going to blow." Jax shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I can't leave you, Dad, not like this." Roy reached up and cupped his son's cheek, leaving a bloody handprint on his skin. "You have to, Jax. The galaxy needs you, needs all of you. Finish what we started. Make our sacrifices mean something." With a final shuddering breath, Roy's hand fell away, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Jax let out a howl of anguish, but there was no time for grief. The planet was tearing itself apart around them. The survivors raced back to their dropships, fighting their way through the crumbling corridors and collapsing tunnels. They barely made it out before the planet exploded, a blinding flash of light and a shockwave that rocked their ships like leaves in a hurricane. From the bridge of the Vortex Guardian flagship, Jax watched as the Syndicate's central world was reduced to a cloud of molten debris. Tears streamed down his face, but his eyes were hard with determination. The Syndicate was gone, but the galaxy still needed healing. The legacy of his father, of Tarek, of all those who had fought and died, would live on. Jax would make sure of it. He turned to Zelos, the Vortex Guardian leader. "What now?" he asked, his voice raw with emotion. Zelos placed a comforting hand on Jax's shoulder. "Now we rebuild. We help the galaxy heal. We ensure that the sacrifices of your father and all the others were not in vain." Jax nodded, a fierce light kindling in his eyes. "For my father," he whispered, "for all of them." The Galactic Alliance had won, but at a terrible cost. The scars of the war would take generations to heal, but heal they would, under the watchful guidance of a new generation of heroes. Heroes like Jax Ross, son of the man who had given everything to save the galaxy from tyranny. In the years that followed, monuments would be raised to Roy Ross and all those who had fallen in the fight against the Syndicate. Their names would be remembered, their deeds celebrated in song and story. But for Jax, the true monument to his father's legacy was the peace and freedom that flourished in the wake of the Syndicate's defeat. A galaxy where children could grow up without fear, where worlds could prosper without the shadow of oppression. A galaxy that Roy Ross had given his life